January 28, 1457, Pembroke Castle, Wales. A 13-year-old girl named Margaret Beaufort screams through another wave of agony as her child-sized body attempts to deliver the future King of England. The midwives exchange terrified glances in the candlelight. They know this girl is dying, her hips too narrow, her frame too small for the enormous task tearing her apart from within. What they don't know is that this teenage mother, should she survive the next few hours, will orchestrate the rise of the Tudor dynasty and change the course of English history forever. But first, she must endure a birthing ordeal so traumatic that she will never bear another child, her body permanently destroyed before it ever finished growing. This is not just another tale of medieval suffering. This is the story of how political ambition literally broke a child's body in the name of power. Margaret Beaufort wasn't simply young when she gave birth. She was a girl whose own development had barely begun, married at 12, pregnant immediately after, and forced to endure what the physicians of the time openly called a miracle if both mother and child survived. The path that led this noble child to that blood-soaked chamber in Pembroke Castle began years earlier in May 1443, when she was born to John Beaufort, 1st Duke of Somerset, and Margaret Beauchamp at Bletsoe Castle. Her bloodline carried the legacy of John of Gaunt, 4th son of Edward III, making her both invaluable and vulnerable in the savage chess game of 15th-century English politics. Her father's death, when Margaret was barely 1 year old, set the stage for everything that followed. John Beaufort had commanded English forces during the final, humiliating defeats of the 100 Years' War, watching territory won by Henry V slip away piece by piece until the weight of failure crushed his spirit. On May 27, 1444, he was found dead at Wimborne Minster, officially from fever, though courtiers whispered of poison or self-destruction. His hollow eyes and trembling hands in those final weeks suggested a man already dead inside, merely waiting for his body to catch up. This left baby Margaret and her mother alone in a world where unprotected women and children were nothing more than currency in the market of political alliances. By age 6, Margaret was already a pawn, betrothed to John de la Pole, son of the Duke of Suffolk. But when Suffolk was murdered in 1450, dragged from his ship in the English Channel and beheaded with a rusty sword that took 6 agonizing blows to complete its work, that betrothal became worthless. The violence of Suffolk's end sent a clear message through the nobility. In the brewing conflict between Lancaster and York, no alliance was sacred, no position secure. Margaret's mother understood this lesson perfectly and quickly arranged a new match that would prove both salvation and damnation for her daughter. Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond, was 26 years old when he married 12-year-old Margaret Beaufort in 1455. The ceremony at Bletsoe Castle saw a child in a wedding dress standing beside a grown man, speaking vows she barely understood, while the assembled nobles calculated the political advantages of this union. Edmund was the half-brother of King Henry VI through his mother's scandalous marriage to Owen Tudor, a Welsh courtier who had caught the eye of Henry V's widow. Despite their questionable origins, the Tudor brothers had the king's favor, and in the chaos beginning to engulf England, royal favor meant everything. The wedding night that followed remains one of history's unspoken horrors. There was no waiting for Margaret to mature, no consideration for her age or development. The marriage was consummated immediately because in the medieval mind, a wife's primary purpose was to produce heirs, regardless of whether her body could survive the process. Within weeks, Margaret's slight frame began showing signs of pregnancy, her childhood ending with the violence that would define the rest of her extraordinary life. The older women of the household watched her growing belly with mounting dread, understanding what a 13-year-old mother meant in an age before modern medicine. It meant probable death for mother, child, or both. But Edmund Tudor would never see his child born. In the autumn of 1456, while campaigning in Wales against Yorkist forces, he was captured at Carmarthen Castle. Whether he died of plague in captivity or was quietly murdered remains one of history's mysteries, though the speed of his decline and the refusal to allow physicians to attend him suggests the darker possibility. By November 3, 1456, Margaret was a 13-year-old widow, heavily pregnant, and utterly alone as England descended into the chaos of the Wars of the Roses. The messenger who brought news of Edmund's death found her in the chapel at Lamphy Palace, praying for her husband's safe return. She knew before he spoke, the careful way he approached, the sympathy in his eyes, that her world had shattered. Jasper Tudor, Edmund's younger brother, took responsibility for his pregnant sister-in-law, moving her to his stronghold at Pembroke Castle, where those massive stone walls might protect her from the violence consuming England. But no walls could protect Margaret from what was coming, the most dramatic birthing experience recorded in medieval chronicles, one that would leave her permanently damaged and unable to ever bear another child. The winter of 1456 to 1457 was particularly brutal at Pembroke Castle, with ice forming on the inside of windows and Atlantic storms battering the ancient walls. Margaret, now 13 and enormous with child, could barely walk the length of her chamber. Dr. Louis Carlierne, a physician who had studied at Oxford and Paris, examined her with growing horror. Her pelvis hadn't fully developed, the baby was positioned wrong, and every measurement he took confirmed his worst fears. This birth would likely kill them both. He confided to Jasper Tudor that in 40 years of practice, he had rarely seen a situation more desperate. They could attempt to turn the baby, risking immediate death, or wait and hope nature would intervene, though waiting might exhaust Margaret beyond recovery. As January 1457 arrived, Margaret spent increasing hours in the castle chapel, her knees raw from constant prayer. She memorized entire books of Latin scripture, as if knowledge might somehow protect her from what was coming. The castle priest, Father Meredith, marveled at her intelligence even as he feared for her life. She understood, with terrible clarity, that she was likely going to die bringing forth this child. Yet she also understood that this child, should it survive, would carry the Lancastrian claim through the chaos ahead. If you're drawn to these forgotten stories of survival and sacrifice, hidden in the shadows of history, please consider subscribing to hear more tales that traditional historians often leave untold. On January 28, 1457, Margaret's labor began during an evening walk on the battlements. The first contraction doubled her over with such violence that she collapsed against the stone ramparts, gasping for breath while her ladies rushed to help. Dame Gwynlyn Ferk Davydd, the head midwife who had delivered babies for 30 years, examined Margaret and her weathered face went pale. The baby was large, turned wrong, and Margaret's body was simply too small. As they prepared the birthing chamber, filling it with the smoke of burning herbs and the murmur of desperate prayers, everyone understood that they were about to witness either a miracle or a tragedy. For 18 hours, Margaret labored in agony that defied description. Her screams echoed off the stone walls until her voice gave out entirely, leaving only gasping, animal sounds of suffering. The midwives worked frantically, their hands slick with blood as Margaret's young body tore itself apart trying to deliver a baby it wasn't ready to carry. Jasper Tudor paced the corridors outside, listening to sounds that would haunt him forever, knowing the future of his family line was dying in that chamber. Dr. Carlierne was summoned as dawn approached, finding Margaret's pulse thread-like, her skin pale as parchment, bleeding internally while the baby's heartbeat grew weaker with each passing moment. The decision was made to attempt manual extraction, reaching inside to guide the baby out, a procedure that might save the child at the cost of the mother's life. Dame Gwynlyn positioned herself, whispering prayers to Saint Margaret of Antioch, patron saint of childbirth, as she prepared for the desperate intervention. What happened next was described by witnesses as either miraculous or horrifying, depending on their perspective. The midwife reached inside the 13-year-old girl and slowly, agonizingly, guided the baby through a passage too small for safe delivery. Margaret's body convulsed with each movement, blood pooling beneath her as internal tissues tore beyond repair. When the baby finally emerged, he was pale and barely breathing. For a terrifying moment, the chamber was silent except for Margaret's labored gasps. Then Dame Gwendolyn cleared the infant's airways and a thin wail filled the air. Henry Tudor, future Henry VII of England, had arrived. Margaret, barely conscious and hemorrhaging, tried to reach for her son, but couldn't lift her arms. They placed him on her chest for the briefest moment before whisking him away to be cleaned and warmed by the fire. In that moment, she looked into the face of the child who had destroyed her body and saw the future of England. The damage was catastrophic and permanent. Dr. Carlian's examination in the following days revealed extensive internal tearing that would never properly heal. Margaret would never bear another child. At 13, her reproductive life was over before it had truly begun. She spent months recovering, battling infections and fevers while her body slowly tried to repair damage that couldn't fully be repaired. She developed a profound terror of physical intimacy that would affect her subsequent marriages, and nightmares that would plague her for decades. Yet from this breaking emerged something extraordinary, an iron will that would see her son to the throne of England. Margaret Beaufort would outlive the Wars of the Roses, orchestrate her son's unlikely victory at Bosworth Field in 1485, and become the most powerful woman in England as the king's mother. But she never forgot the price she paid at 13 years old, her childhood and her body's sacrifice on the altar of dynastic ambition. She signed her letters Margaret R., claiming a queen's privilege she had earned through suffering no crown could equal. The girl who nearly died giving birth to a king would become the architect of the Tudor dynasty, proving that sometimes the greatest power comes from surviving what should have destroyed you. What haunts you most about Margaret S. story, the theft of her childhood or her transformation of trauma into triumph? Share your thoughts below.